I had been on the road for over 12 hours, crossing the nothingness between Nevada and California. US 50, known as the loneliest road in America, no longer scared me. The silence was constant, only broken by the sound of the engine and the headlight cutting through the darkness. Fatigue had started to hit hard, my eyes felt heavy and my mind wandered. I just wanted to get there, find somewhere to rest. But the more I drove, the more it seemed like the road never ended. It stretched in front of me as if it were infinite. At first, I thought it was just my tired mind playing with me. I looked out the window, tried to change the radio station, but everything seemed to be the same. The same desolate landscape, the same nothingness around me. I had already seen those landmarks, those stones in the middle of the road, but I didn't remember passing by there before. I thought it was strange, but I continued. I drove for another hour, hoping to see some sign of change, but what I saw was the same landmark, the same detour, the same curve that I had passed before. I began to wonder if I was delusional, but I couldn't deny what I saw. Everything was identical. I tried to get off the road, looking for another path, something that would take me away from this feeling. I turned onto a dirt road on the left, but when I turned the corner and looked ahead, I was back in the same spot. That curve, that straight line. I hadn't been there, but somehow, I was back in the same place. I looked in the rearview mirror and the road behind me was perfectly empty, as if there was no one on my tail. But the fear began to grow. It can't be, I thought. I got back on the main track and tried again, accelerating, forcing a change, but nothing seemed to work. Every time I turned around, I came back to the same spot. I knew something was wrong. I was no longer alone on the road. The darkness around me seemed to intensify, and fear settled in my chest like a weight. It wasn't just tiredness anymore. It was as if the road was holding me back. The steering wheel felt heavier every time I turned to try to move forward, as if the road itself was resisting. And no matter how hard I tried, nothing changed. I was stuck, driving in circles, with no way out. A time loop, an invisible prison that I didn't know how to break. Time began to distort. I no longer knew how long I had been there, whether it was hours or days. Fatigue no longer mattered, nor did hunger or thirst. I found myself trapped in a cycle that seemed to never end. Every time I passed the same spots, it seemed like something subtly changed. The shadows grew heavier, the headlights dimmer, and a growing feeling that something was watching me came over me. When I looked around, the desert seemed even emptier, more frightening. The silence was oppressive, as if the road itself was waiting for me to understand what was happening. I screamed, I punched the steering wheel, I tried everything I could to change the direction of my travel, but nothing seemed to work. Until, for the 10th time, I passed the same point. Those damn rocks, that turnoff, that rusty sign. But now, something different. In the corner of my eye, I saw a figure on the side of the road, a shadow, a person. The heart raced. I stopped the truck abruptly and looked outside. There was no one. The fear intensified. It was as if the presence was there, but somehow still watching me from afar. I wanted to get out of there, but when I looked ahead, I only saw the same spot. Once again. I was in the same place. I decided to try one last thing. The road in front of me continued to stretch in a straight line, without end. I sped up, like I was trying to escape reality, but I only got one more rep. The figure appeared again, this time closer, more visible. It was a silhouette of a man, but no details could be seen. Fear took over, and I just couldn't stop looking. I looked in the mirrors, but there was no one behind me. The road was empty, but the figure was still there, closer each time I passed. I didn't know what to do, how to break the cycle. It was then that, in a fit of desperation, I decided to stop for good. I parked the truck, turned off the engine and got out. The desert was silent, and the figure was there, motionless, standing in the middle of the road. As I got closer, I felt as if the air had become thicker, heavier. And then, around the corner, the figure disappeared. I didn't see her anymore. The sound of my own footsteps seemed amplified, but the road was still there, intact. I looked back, and once again, everything seemed to be exactly the same. I was trapped, in an eternal loop, and I knew I would never get out. I walked back to the truck, legs shaking, and sat down, completely unsure of what to do. The air inside the cabin felt thick, charged with indescribable tension. The feeling of being watched never left me. I looked around, trying to understand what was happening, but the desert seemed even more immense, more empty. The figure had disappeared, but the road continued. Same point. The same deviation. I was stuck, in a repeating cycle that seemed eternal. And the worst part, it seemed like there was no way out. I tried again, starting the engine and accelerating, but it was no use. I passed the rocks, the detour, and, as always, everything was back to the beginning. I even tried to go back to the point where I found the figure, but, once again, everything was deserted. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. I was stuck in a never-ending loop, and every time I passed the same points, I felt like something was watching me, waiting for me to understand what was happening. But what was it? What should I understand? That's when I realized I wasn't alone anymore. A voice, low and distant, began to echo inside the cabin, coming from nowhere. "You'll never get out of here," said the voice, with a calm tone, as if he was talking about something he had known for a long time. "This road is your prison now." I looked around, trying to find the source of the voice, but there was no one. I was completely alone, but still, the presence was palpable. The feeling that the road was consuming me, that I was part of it now, was inescapable. I never went back to that road. When someone asks me about what happened that night, I simply have no words. I know that, somehow, I'm still stuck there, somewhere between reality and delusion. The road, the desert, the figure on the side of the road, all of it still haunts me. And I know that no matter how hard I try to forget, one day, when night falls and the road stretches out in front of me again, I will come back. Because there is no escaping what was never real, but which always seems to be waiting, around the next bend. I was driving the same route as always, along the empty highway of I-90, in the middle of the night. The truck cut through the silence of the desert, and the only light came from the headlights, illuminating the nothingness in front of me. The radio was silent, with no signal, and the feeling of loneliness was overwhelming. I was already tired, after more than 10 hours of driving, and all I wanted was to get to my destination quickly and rest. But that night, something was different. I don't know if it was tiredness or if something was really happening, but I started to feel like I was being watched. The passenger seat was empty, as always. But, for some reason, that absence bothered me. I glanced at the seat every now and then, trying to focus on the road, but I felt a presence there, next to me. It wasn't a normal feeling. It was as if someone was sitting there, as real as I was, but when I looked, there was nothing. I couldn't explain it. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I started to hear something, a low, almost muffled sound, coming from that empty bench. It was a breath. Gentle but constant. As if someone was breathing next to me. I turned my head quickly, but of course, the bench was empty. No movement, nothing but my own breathing and the sound of the engine. But I didn't feel relieved. The sound of breathing continued, louder now, as if it were getting closer. With each breath, The air seemed to become denser inside the cabin. I looked in the rearview mirror but didn't see anything. Just the deserted road and emptiness behind me. Then came the murmur. Low, barely audible, but still, there was something there, something that shouldn't be. It was like someone was whispering something in my ear, but I couldn't understand the words. I looked at the bench again, and the feeling of an invisible presence became stronger, as if it was watching me, waiting for me to take action. The cold began to take over the cabin, and I was shaking, not only because of the temperature, but because of the tension that was taking over my entire body. With every second, I felt the sensation that someone was there, by my side, stronger. The breathing, now heavier, seemed to come directly from the passenger seat. I glanced, trying not to take my eyes off the road, but the presence seemed so real that it left me paralyzed. I could feel the weight of someone sitting there, but at the same time, the bench was still empty. I forced my mind to rationalize, trying to find an explanation, the wind, the engine, anything that would make me understand what was happening. But there was nothing to explain that feeling of closeness, of something there, breathing calmly, as if it knew I felt it. The murmur continued, and that was when I finally heard the words. They weren't clear, but the words were there. "Come back," I heard, in a voice so low it seemed to come from inside me. I almost screamed. That voice wasn't mine. It wasn't my imagination. I looked back at the passenger seat, and the feeling that something or someone was there, so close, was overwhelming. I tried to swallow my fear, but I couldn't. My throat felt dry, and the air felt increasingly heavy. Suddenly, the breathing stopped. Silence invaded the cabin, but the emptiness was worse than the sound. I tried to speed up, increase my speed, thinking that would make me get away from it all. But the faster I drove, the more the seat next to me seemed more present. I passed a sharp turn, trying to focus, but as I looked at the bench, the shadow there seemed to move. As if the invisible form was adjusting, settling, breathing close to me. When I finally looked in the rearview mirror, something made me freeze. The road was empty, but in the glass, reflected, there was a silhouette, a dark and undefined shadow, as if it were sitting next to me. I could no longer distinguish what was real and what wasn't. I looked at the bench again, and even though I knew there was no one there, a part of me was sure that that presence was waiting, watching me. I couldn't deal with the situation anymore. Fear took over, and the simple act of looking ahead left me in a panic. There was no longer any way to ignore it, something was with me. Something invisible, but very real. I didn't know what to do. I could no longer trust what my eyes saw. I looked in the rearview mirror once more, but the silhouette I had seen before was no longer there. The passenger seat was still empty, but the feeling that someone was next to me, invisible, still accompanied me. The breathing returned, heavier, as if it were a subtle threat, a presence that wasn't willing to leave me. I looked out the window, at the dark outside, and the wind seemed colder, stranger, like it was whispering something. I didn't want to be there anymore. I needed to stop. I looked for a stop, any place to stop and try to understand what was happening, but it seemed like the road would never end. With every kilometer, the bench next to me seemed closer. I tried to speed up once more, but the feeling of being followed, of something invisible watching me, only grew. Panic began to consume me, and I knew that if I didn't stop, fear would take over me completely. Finally, I spotted a small rest area ahead. It was the only option. I didn't think twice. I parked the truck with shaking hands and took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I turned off the engine and looked at the passenger seat, which was still empty. I wanted to believe that everything was just a hallucination, something caused by tiredness and loneliness. But as I looked at the bench, I felt a pressure, as if someone was watching me directly. I wanted to get out of the truck, but something was stopping me. It was as if an invisible force was holding me back, as if the bench next to me was a prison, and I was trapped with that presence. I don't know how long I spent there. When I finally managed to muster the strength to get out of the truck and take a look around, the station was completely empty, with no sign of anyone. I didn't see anything, but the air felt different. Something was there, watching me. I still can't explain what happened that night, but I've never traveled alone at night since. And always, every time I look at the passenger seat, I feel that invisible presence, waiting. As if he was watching me, waiting for something. I was never the same after that. It was a quiet night, with no sign of life on the road. I was driving along old Route 66, a road few still travel. The asphalt was worn down, and the shadows of the trees on the side of the road seemed to swallow the truck's headlights. I had walked this path several times before, but something was strange that night. The wind was freezing cold, and the radio was silent, with no signal. The feeling of loneliness was heavy, but I was used to it. The clock on the dashboard showed 1:30 in the morning, and the road seemed endless. That's when I heard it. First, it was a low sound, almost like a murmur, coming from the back of the cabin. I looked in the mirrors, but nothing was there. I thought it was just the wind, maybe some leaves hitting the glass. But the sound persisted, gradually growing louder, as if several voices were talking in the distance. I stayed alert, trying to understand what was happening. Then, I heard something clearer. The sound of cars, engines revving, tires scraping the asphalt. But, that didn't make sense. There was no other car on the road, and the sound seemed as clear as if it were real. The strangest thing was that the sounds weren't coming from outside the truck, but inside, as if I were being transported to another time. I looked around, trying to understand, and that's when I saw it. On the horizon, something shone in the darkness, like old car headlights, illuminating the road as if it were a flash from the past. The voices I heard became clearer, now accompanied by distant laughter and words I couldn't understand. I tried to speed up, change the route, but everything seemed to repeat itself. I couldn't escape the sound. The sound of a time that I didn't recognize, but that seemed to fit perfectly on the road I was on. I did what anyone would do when they feel trapped in something unexplainable. I parked the truck on the shoulder, turned off the engine and tried to get out. The sound grew louder and louder, as if I had invaded a place I shouldn't have been. The sound of cars passed me by, and I couldn't see anything. Just the sound, the noise of the engines, the conversations, the laughter and even the screams of people I didn't know. I looked around, but the road was empty. There were no cars, there was no one. I was alone, but the sounds continued, as if something from the past was unraveling to swallow me. I stood still, inside the truck, listening to that chaos of the past unfolding around me. The road was deserted, but the sound of conversations, laughter and engines seemed to come from all sides, getting closer and closer, as if being surrounded by an invisible crowd. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to process what was happening. When I opened them again, the view of the road looked different. The headlights had turned into the old yellow headlights of old cars, and the road in front of me was full of cars. They passed quickly, one after the other, without looking at me. I was there, but I wasn't there. It was as if I had been transported to a time that was not mine. The sound of a 50s song started playing, as if it were coming from some old radio. The smell of burning fuel filled the air, and the feeling of being out of place, out of time, intensified. I looked at the steering wheel, the cabin, but everything seemed normal. However, the road ahead of me was different. The shadows of the surrounding trees seemed to move, dance, as if they were being illuminated by ancient lanterns. I could no longer discern what was real and what was going on in my mind. Fear started to take over me. I no longer knew if I was trapped in a nightmare or if I was having a supernatural experience. That's when the music stopped, and the sound of voices disappeared. But the silence was even more terrifying. I was back on the deserted road, but I didn't know where I was anymore. The darkness seemed to swallow everything around, and the feeling of having lost control of the situation was unbearable. I turned the ignition key, but the truck engine wouldn't start. I was forced to leave, to walk to the side of the road, trying to understand what had happened. When I put my foot on the cold earth, the sound returned. Now stronger. As if everything was returning to its place, to its time, but without explanation. Suddenly, a vision paralyzed me. I looked down the road and saw a figure approaching. It was a man, dressed in old clothes, a leather jacket and a hat. He was walking towards me, but he made no sound, as if he were floating. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. He approached slowly, and I could feel his presence, as if he were inside me. When it got close enough, the vision of everything around me distorted again, as if reality was breaking apart. The voices grew louder, cars passed by me and the man disappeared into thin air. The road returned to silence. The sound disappeared as quickly as it appeared, and the silence was even more deafening. The road was empty again, and the feeling of being in a place where time has distorted has never been so strong. I was sweating cold, my chest tight, trying to understand what had happened. I looked at the truck, still parked there on the side of the road, and everything seemed normal. But something had changed. Something inside me was different. The road, that stretch of Route 66, now seemed darker, denser, as if it were carrying something from the past. Something that shouldn't be seen. I tried to start the engine one more time, but the truck didn't respond. The noise of the old cars, the laughter, the music, everything was becoming a distant echo in my head. I knew I was no longer alone there, but something was stopping me from acting. Something invisible. Fear paralyzed me. The road now felt like a prison, with time flowing erratically around me, as if I were being watched by something that had long since died but had not yet left. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to find some rational explanation for what was happening. When I opened my eyes, the road was empty. The music had stopped, and the cars were gone. I looked ahead and realized that even though everything was silent, the road seemed longer than before. As if I were in a cycle, stuck between the past and the present. I tried to speed up the truck, but the road never came to an end. And then, a thought hit me like lightning: I was never going to get out of there. The road, the sound, the feeling of being watched, it was all part of something bigger, something that didn't make sense. I shakily got back into the truck and started driving again. Each kilometer seemed to take longer than the last, and the fear that something from another time was following me consumed me. I don't know how long I spent there, but I know that the feeling of being trapped in a broken timeline never left me. And, to this day, every time I pass that road, the old music comes back to me. And deep down, I know, the road will never let me go. It was a moonless night, the sky was covered in dark clouds, and the road in front of me seemed to swallow the truck's headlights. I was traveling along US 70, that desolate part of New Mexico, with no signs of life around. The cabin was quiet, the radio was just hissing, and I couldn't get the feeling that something was wrong out of my head. The wind was strong, and the road in front of me stretched into nothingness. I was already tired, but something was stopping me from stopping, as if the road was calling me. That's when I saw it. First, it was a small light in the distance, so far away that it looked like a star lost in the sky. But as I looked closer, I realized it was floating, moving slowly toward the road. I thought it was some kind of headlight from another truck, but when I looked around, there was nothing but emptiness. The light continued to float ahead, moving as if it had a life of its own. It didn't have a visible source, it didn't reflect the light from my truck's headlights. It was a cold, bluish light that seemed to shine with an unearthly intensity. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. The light seemed to call to me, and every time I looked at it, it seemed to move a little faster. I started following, thinking maybe it was some kind of sign, an indication that there was something ahead. But as I got closer, the light moved away, always at the same distance. It was as if she was moving to guide me, but at the same time, pushing me away, forcing me to continue following an unknown path. What should have been a simple detour turned into a chase, and I felt increasingly trapped in it. I tried to speed up, thinking that maybe if I went faster I could catch up to her. But the more I tried, the more the light receded. I didn't know why I was following her, but I couldn't stop. Every time I looked at the road ahead, the light moved as if it had a life of its own, guiding me along a path that seemed to have no end. The surrounding landscape seemed to change, but in a subtle way, as if the road itself was distorting. Fear began to take over me, but I couldn't stop looking at that light, as if it was hypnotizing me, controlling me. The road seemed increasingly strange. The trees, previously visible on the sides, were now distorted, with shadows that moved disjointedly, as if the reality around me was falling apart. I tried to look around, looking for some reference point, something familiar, but everything was blank, shadowy. The light ahead kept moving, always at the same distance, and I could no longer distinguish where the road ended or began. Fear tightened my chest. I felt like I was being led by something beyond my control. The truck was getting harder to control. Every time I tried to accelerate, the steering wheel seemed to resist, as if the road itself was pulling me somewhere I didn't want to go. The light, that strange, glowing presence ahead, moved away, daring me to follow. I was starting to question my sanity, wondering if this was all real or if I was just losing my mind in the middle of a deserted road. But somehow I knew I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I knew I would never find the end again. Then, without warning, the light disappeared. It wasn't gradual, it wasn't like a light that goes out little by little. She simply disappeared, as if she had been swallowed by darkness, leaving an immense void in front of me. I braked sharply, almost losing control of the truck. The sound of tires scraping on the empty road brought me back to reality. What was happening? Where was the light? Where was the road? I felt lost, completely lost, as if I had entered a place where time and space no longer made sense. Fear turned into panic. I was alone on that road, somewhere I no longer recognized. The darkness was thicker, more oppressive, and the air felt colder. I looked around, waiting for something, anything, to appear, but the only sound was the truck's engine and the rapid beating of my heart. I turned on the truck's lights, but they didn't seem to illuminate anything. The road in front of me was empty, but I knew something was there, waiting. The light was gone, but something, or someone, was watching me. I was paralyzed. The road was silent, and the only thing I could hear was my own rapid breathing. I looked at the truck's dashboard, trying to find some explanation, any sign that this was all just a nightmare. But the clock was running, the engine was running, and I was still there, on that deserted road. What was that light? What had I seen? The feeling of being watched intensified, and I felt a strong presence around me. I was no longer alone. I accelerated again, desperate, trying to get out of that place. The road in front of me seemed endless, as if it had no end. With each curve, with each kilometer, the feeling that I was going in circles increased. It was as if the light had taken me to a dead end, to a place where time no longer existed. I tried to turn onto another road, but the road signs were blurry, unreadable, as if the world around me was disintegrating. I didn't know where else to go, and fear took over me with overwhelming force. That's when I finally saw something in the distance. A light. But it wasn't the same light I had followed before. It was fainter, more distant, but still, the same sensation. I definitely knew it was her. The light seemed to call me back, like an illusion of hope in a sea of despair. I sped up, determined to catch up and finally find a way out. But with each step, the light moved away, further and further, as if it was testing me, daring me to continue. No matter how hard I tried, the light was never close enough. It got further and further away, until it disappeared into the fog. I stopped, once again. The road was empty. The silence was so heavy that it seemed as if time itself had stopped. I looked around, trying to understand what had happened, but the truth was simple: I was stuck in a cycle. An endless road, a light that never went out and that never let me escape. I knew I was in a place I shouldn't be, and that I would never get out. The road continued, and the light continued to shine in front of me, always in the distance, always unattainable. I didn't know how much longer I could keep driving, but something told me that even if I stopped, the road wouldn't stop chasing me. It was 1 in the morning when I stopped at that rest stop, in the middle of a deserted road. I was exhausted, my eyes were heavy from driving, but I knew I needed to rest before continuing. That station was the only one for miles, and there was no one else except me and the station's dim, blinking light. The air was cold, but I didn't care. I just needed some peace, a moment to get out of the cabin and stretch my legs. I dragged myself to the station's small restaurant and passed through the glass window as I entered. That's when I saw it. The reflection took me by surprise. I looked at the window and saw my own image, but something was wrong. I wasn't smiling, but my reflection was. I froze, staring at that smile in the glass. My eyes widened, and I stood still, trying to understand what was happening. I was there, right in front of me, but that reflection looked different. He smiled, with a smile that wasn't mine. A smile that seemed to know something I didn't know. I looked at my real face, expecting to see an expression of surprise or confusion, but there was nothing. Just emptiness. The smile in the glass remained. I took a step back, trying to understand what was happening. The reflection was still there, smiling at me, while I couldn't move a muscle. The feeling that something was wrong invaded me instantly. I looked around, but there was no one. The station was deserted, the restaurant empty. I tried to convince myself that it was just tiredness, some optical illusion brought on by lack of rest, but that smile was there, impossibly perfect, as I just watched. I moved away, but the reflection didn't move. It was fixed, as if it were waiting for me. I turned away, determined to ignore it, but the feeling that something was watching me didn't go away. I looked back at the window, but when I turned around, the reflection disappeared. There was no one else at the window. I looked around, looking for an explanation, but everything was empty. I knew what I had seen, but I couldn't understand it. There was no one else at the station, nor near the window, but at that moment, I knew something was wrong. And I didn't know if that smile was just the beginning of something much worse. I backed away from the glass, trying to stay calm. The station seemed darker, emptier suddenly, as if the presence of someone, or something, had been there, waiting. I took a deep breath and walked into the restaurant, trying to ignore what I had just seen. The dim light and the sound of the wind blowing outside seemed to add to the silence. The restaurant was empty except for a man behind the counter, who glanced at me quickly and went back to what he was doing. I sat at a table, but I couldn't stop looking at the window, where, instinctively, I knew my reflection was still watching me. The feeling that something was following me continued to grow. It wasn't just the smile. It was the way the reflection seemed to watch me, like it was aware of something I didn't know, like it was trying to tell me something. I felt invaded. I looked at the window one last time, but I didn't see my reflection. I didn't see anything. Just the darkness outside, and the dim light that didn't seem to illuminate anything. My heart started to beat faster. Something inside me said I should leave, but for some reason I couldn't. Something was keeping me there, as if the post were now a trap. The waiter brought my coffee, but I could barely touch it. I felt trapped, like this place had become different. I looked at the man behind the counter, hoping for some kind of help, but he didn't seem to notice my distress. He was lost in his own thoughts, and for a moment I thought maybe he was the one watching me. But it wasn't him. I knew it wasn't. I looked at the window again, and that's when I noticed something even more disturbing. There was no longer just the reflection of my face. Now, there was something more. Something that wasn't physically there, but seemed to form. A shadow in the reflection. I stood up, trying to maintain my composure, but my legs felt weak. The reflection was distorting, as if something was trying to get out of the window, as if the shadow was coming to life. I didn't know what else to do. I looked around, trying to find a way out, but the post seemed to have become even tighter. I moved toward the door, and when I passed the window again, the reflection was no longer there. But the feeling of being watched, still haunted me. I took a deep breath and went outside, deciding to continue my journey, but something inside me knew that that vision, that smile, wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I got into the truck, trying to put everything that had happened that night behind me. The road was deserted, and the silence in the cabin was almost palpable. But the feeling that something was there, lurking for me, wouldn't leave me. With every kilometer that passed, I felt invisible eyes watching me, as if that smile was still with me. I looked in the rearview mirror but didn't see anything. The road was empty. Still, the tension in my chest didn't ease. With every turn I made, the fear increased. It wasn't just the reflection. It was the certainty that something inexplicable had happened. I tried to convince myself that it was just tiredness, or a trick of the mind, but something inside me knew that wasn't it. The feeling that the reflection, the smile, was following me, chasing me, wouldn't leave my head. The road seemed to stretch endlessly in front of me, as if I were heading toward something I couldn't understand. When I finally passed through a small town and onto a quieter road, I thought the fear would subside. But what I didn't expect was to see the reflection again. It wasn't on the truck's window, but on the windows of a roadside store. The same figure. The same smile. I stopped the truck abruptly, and for a moment I thought about getting out, going to the store, checking out what was going on. But when I looked again, the figure disappeared, as if it had never existed. I knew something was wrong. The reflection, the smile, the feeling of being watched, it all didn't make sense. But what terrified me most was the certainty that, even when I left that road, even when I thought I was safe, the smile would return. Because the reflection, it wasn't just in the window anymore. He was inside me. And I didn't know how far it would go.